So it's quite hard to argue with the common sentiment that Apple's smartwatch lineup is the top dog when we discuss wearables. Incompatibility though with Android and a resurgent Wear OS over the past couple of years, headed by the Pixel Watch and the Galaxy Watch lineup, begs the question though of how far Google's latest released gadget stacks up against a similarly new Apple Watch Series 8. Well, we're going to compare the two, and here's everything you need to know. For the purposes of this comparison, we're comparing like for like, or at least as close as we can get to that summation. At 41mm, the Pixel Watch is small, so in the interest of fairness, we're comparing it to the 41mm Apple Watch Series 8. That's actually tougher than expected given the distinct differences in shape and overall size of each wearable though. So if we cast your minds back, Apple radically adjusted that familiar trope of circular wearables when it released its squared off design way back when, that feels very much like the rest of Apple's lineup, if you will. The Series 8 doesn't necessarily change a thing, but in terms of the chassis, it looks very much like it does with the rest of their tech. The Google Pixel Watch is more of a traditional watch that is, with a circular shape, and it looks more at home with plenty of different outfits and looks as far as we're concerned. Wear OS of course is loved and loathed for a number of reasons, but the variable form factors are certainly a strength that Wear OS holds on to. The Apple Watch hasn't changed drastically, as we mentioned, over the past 7 or 8 years that it's existed. Despite the smaller 41mm chassis sizes, the displays here do differ quite substantially. A lot of that is owed to Apple's squared screen design approach. The AMOLED panel on the 41mm Apple Watch Series 8 measures in at 1.7 inches, while the Pixel Watch comes in at a pretty paltry 1.2 inches. There's also a sizable bezel surrounding on that circular display. In direct sunlight, these can be exacerbated, these bezels can be seen, but in general usage you actually will barely notice, which is testament to how well Google has blended this with the UI. Aside from the screen differences, the Pixel Watch and the Apple Watch Series 8 displays are actually very close in terms of fidelity and both look pin sharp. Google has certainly taken some design cues from the Apple Watch with their first wearable though. The recycled stainless steel chassis has a knurled crown and a single side button above that for assistant and recent app menu access. This is almost identical to the Apple Watch, albeit with a slightly different placement in the squared off case for those buttons. It's also important to note that the stainless steel equivalent of the Apple Watch comes in at over $700, while the Pixel Watch retails for $350 for that Wi-Fi Bluetooth variant. Although only around 6 grams separates the two 41mm wearables, that's 36 grams for the Pixel Watch versus 42.3 for the Apple Watch, we have to say that the former does feel quite a bit lighter. The default Pixel Watch strap is overall really solid, and it's far better, at least to fit, than Apple Watch's default sport band, but the mechanism itself, the proprietary mechanism, is slightly trickier to master. The wealth of bands available is a strong suit for both wearables, but Apple does have the edge in terms of official and third-party bands and straps available to you after purchasing. Another thing to note here is that at 12.3mm thick, the Pixel Watch is quite a chunky little device. That said, at 10.3mm, you would expect this to be a huge difference versus the Apple Watch, but it isn't quite as drastic as you would expect. I do think that the weight differences are definitely more pronounced, and the shape and size differences as well overall with those dimensions, which you'll see on screen, are not necessarily as pronounced as I expected going into this comparison. The internals as well, these are quite different given how far apart iOS and Android based operating systems do happen to be on this duo. Google relies on the practically ancient 10nm based Exynos 9110 with a Cortex M33 coprocessor that's paired with 2GB of RAM to help with extra heavy lifting on this wearable. Apple relies on its own S8 processor and just 1GB of RAM to run Watch OS. Storage though on both models comes in at 32GB, which is more than enough to hold all of your apps, plus even a few downloaded playlists from your favourite streaming or podcast services. The Pixel Watch battery is one of the main sore points, at least ahead of review, and although it's rated at 24 hours versus the 18-hour rated 41mm Apple Watch, it actually can come up short when certain features are active. Disabling the always-on display does help get lifespan parity, but it's a lot closer than you would necessarily expect ahead of time. What's also interesting is that neither wearable supports third-party Qi wireless chargers. You'll actually need a compatible magnetic puck or in-the-box charger to power up these wearables. The Pixel Watch takes around 80 minutes to fully charge, while the Apple Watch requires 120 minutes on a compatible charger to top that up fully. So while the hardware can be compared more readily, the gulf between those two operating systems has never really been more evident with Google's first direct attempt at a smartwatch. Without bashing Wear OS, it feels like an afterthought that has always been in a state of transition, although it has changed over the past few years. That said, it begs the question, what does a good smartwatch OS actually look like? If it's just handling notifications, managing music playback on your phone, making NFC payments, replying to messages, or tracking workouts, then you're probably covered with Wear OS. That said, Watch OS has a greater volume of high-quality third-party applications available via the App Store, which does give it an undoubted edge in a lot of ways. In years gone by, the biggest problem that many cited with Wear OS, and we have, has been the subpar performance levels. The Exynos 9110 shouldn't be holding things together so well, but there are some minor slowdowns and what feels like a lack of polish, at least when compared directly to Apple Watch Series 8. But overall, even with the usage of that older processor and somewhat shockingly when used side by side, the performance isn't actually that far apart, even if the two OSs are fundamentally different. Most apps, notifications, and menus load in good time, and the overall experience is slick on the Apple Watch Series 8 and the Pixel Watch. The Apple Watch certainly does have an edge here and there, but Google has really done a particularly good job, given that this is a first generation wearable using that older processor technology. I also must admit that I do prefer the Quick Tiles option that you'll find on Wear OS for finding out key information quickly and therefore bypassing the need to launch into any application or mess around with extra menus. This is solely missing on the Apple Watch Series 8, with a left to right swipe only changing the preset watch faces that you've installed. The dedicated apps for both wearables are also really quite different. You can do a great deal from the new Pixel Watch app, including changing watch faces, initiating system updates, adjusting the quick tiles, but not really that much else. On iOS, the Apple Watch app is a one-stop shop for everything related to your wearable, including fitness tracking, full app settings, plus way more on top of that. Notifications are also handled quite differently on watchOS and Wear OS. For starters, the squared display on the Apple Watch Series 8 certainly makes things much easier to read and expand any notifications by virtue of that larger area. On Pixel Watch, the rounded display can cut things off and make spacing a little bit awkward. Apple also offers richer notifications for certain applications like the fitness app. This means when tapping a notification, you'll sometimes get an overflow section with key information like your heart rate for a recent workout or steps taken available right there at a glance. On Pixel Watch, notifications are quite uniform with how Wear OS has handled them for some time already. Tapping a notification allows you to reply, or in some cases open the full version of that app on your smartwatch. While that's fine, getting some quick information would be a nice extra touch. What's more, when receiving Google Home notifications on Apple Watch, you'll often get a short GIF or a PNG of your at-home cameras, for instance. Annoyingly, this isn't yet available on the Pixel Watch, even if the app was built specifically to launch with Google's first-party smart wearable, so we're hoping this will come in a future update. It's also important to note that the Pixel Watch has the best haptics of any Wear OS watch to date. It just comes up short against the vibration-based feedback of the Apple Watch Series 8. Every tap on that device is accompanied by a subtle buzz that has an X, Y, and even a Z position within Watch OS. Pixel Watch vibrations though, they're really nice, tight and crisp, and they are certainly not a huge step down, but there is a noticeable difference between the two. The speakers are also similarly solid across both wearables, which is ideal for calls and that kind of thing. Listening to audio out loud on Apple Watch is actually limited on an app-by-app basis, which definitely gives the Pixel Watch an edge here, although we're not going to fully compare Siri and Google Assistant, which is what you'll do most of the time. The utility and ubiquity of Google's AI helper definitely wipes the floor with Google's AI efforts. Voice recognition and that Google hot word that I'm not going to say out loud makes this almost flawless. That said, Siri is becoming more and more useful with better voice recognition and integration with watch features you have at your fingertips. A pretty obvious point here is that neither wearable can be used across the iOS and Android divide. The Apple Watch integrates certainly more readily with iOS, but the Pixel Watch isn't too far behind with fast pair support and a simple application that lets you change the watch face and adjust those settings and whatnot. And we're hoping that will improve over time as Google progresses with their software updates too. As for the fitness tracking elements, by tying the Pixel Watch to Fitbit, we think it was a great step above that truly basic Google Fit suite of tracking, fitness and analysis functions that were available on Wear OS previously. And while the basic workout tracking is solid on the Pixel Watch, certain features being hidden behind that Fitbit paywall is quite disappointing on the whole. This includes things like enhanced sleep tracking, specific health data, and even some rudimentary workout tips. It might also frustrate some people to learn that you need to use the Pixel Watch app in tandem with the Fitbit app to get that full experience on this watch too. The Apple Watch has more metrics available out of the box as standard, but like the Pixel Watch, you can access further workout routines and coaching with a paid Apple Fitness Plus plan. Both of these plans do start at $9.99 per month, but you can actually get a 6-month free trial for Fitbit Premium with the Pixel Watch after you've purchased that. That does soften the blow somewhat, but for tracking your workouts and basic health metrics, we've got to say the free tier is absolutely fine, but you won't have huge historical data that you can dive into as readily as you can on Apple's smartwatch. Apple's suite of fitness and health tracking features certainly far surpass what Google and that standard Fitbit plan can offer. ECG analysis is available on both wearables alongside sleep tracking, constant heart rate and blood oxygen level monitoring. Apple's latest smartwatch though does have a few aces up its own sleeve, as you can have access to things like noise or sound detection in loud environments, helping you protect your ears, menstrual cycle tracking and skin temperature reading, plus way more on top of that it is hard to list. It's an unfair comparison in many ways, as the Apple Watch has extra sensors and a far more in-depth system to give you a picture of your current health. Another sore point for the Pixel Watch though is that lack of auto workout tracking. While this isn't necessarily a deal breaker, it could be seen as an annoyance if you do happen to forget to set a mode or hit that start button while at the gym. There is no denying that, at least at this stage, the Apple Watch is a far better everyday companion if you want in-depth fitness and health tracking functionality on your wrist with smartwatch functionality bundled in. So if you're having to choose between the two, it clearly boils down to which mobile operating system that you do use on a daily basis as to which smartwatch is going to be right for you. If you use Android, well then you'll look towards the Pixel Watch, or you want to look towards that. If you use iOS, then it is basically Apple Watch or bust. We have to say though, Google's first direct attempt at making a rival to the Apple Watch there's been a pretty valiant effort here. That said, it doesn't quite stack up against Apple's expertise in crafting wearables and their rich history of doing so over the past 7 or 8 years. Realistically, the Achilles heel of the Pixel Watch could be considered Wear OS. While it's fine in its own space, when you start comparing it directly to the feature-rich and really mature Wear OS, it does come up just short, although it has improved and come a long way even in the past 2 years. Adding to that though, it's still hard to deny that the best Wear OS watch out there still belongs to Samsung in the form of the Galaxy Watch 5 series, with Google working more directly with the Korean tech giant to help bolster the wearable operating system. It was kind of hard to believe that the Pixel Watch would usurp the Galaxy Watch even upon its release. Even so though, we have to say the Pixel Watch is a great Wear OS Fitbit hybrid that, even in its first iteration, has hit the mark in a ton of important areas. It's not quite the perfect Android companion in that regard, and it definitely isn't better than the Galaxy Watch 5 or even the Apple Watch Series 8, but it'll please a lot of people, especially those with an Android phone. I want to know though what you think. Are you indifferent to Apple smartwatches, or do you think that they are the gold standard? Do you think Google did a good job this first time around and how they stacked up to Apple's own efforts? Let me know down in the comment sections below. It's always interesting to hear what people have to say. I personally think that the Pixel Watch has actually surprised me. It's not perfect, but it's a fairly good start. Anyway though, enough from me. Thanks for watching, and I will speak to you later.